Our next guest is a true multi-talented force, an Emmy award-winning actor who has conquered theater, television, and film. He's ran with Apollo Creed. He's been an outlaw on Lonesome Dove. He's been a funny gay guy on Stage 17. I mean, you've done it all. Our next guest, the one and only, Eric McCormack. What's going on, McCormack?
Hello. Hello, Gentry. Oh, I'm in New York City and promoting my television show.
Very nice. How is it working with that Anthony Horowitz? He's known for some really good storytelling. What a storyteller that guy is.
He is. I mean, he's like this Stephen King of the UK, really prolific mystery writer. And this particular project wasn't based on one of his books. It was just an idea he had, took it to his producer wife, and they said, let's sell it. But I love the title. I think 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue deserves to be remembered. So it's really fun. Basically, it's a plane crash in a Mexican jungle, all American characters, except for one, and they're just trying to get to Houston. But in the week that they try to survive the crash, they start dying one by one, and not of natural causes. So something's going on in the Mexican jungle.
The new series, 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue, it premieres on Sunday, March 2nd on MGM+. Our guest, Eric McCormack. What's the closest you've ever come in your life before this to navigating the perils of a Mexican jungle? Is this the first time that you've been in this type of environment?
I think the closest I've come is probably, trying to get a waiter at the all-inclusive in Cancun. I really haven't suffered as much as perhaps the characters do.
And this was shot in the Canary Islands, which is a very exotic spot. Did you enjoy the time shooting this?
Yeah, this was pretty, my agents called and they said, we think you're going to like this one. But they led with where it shoots, which is not normal. And they said, okay, the Canary Islands for 4 months. And I said, okay, is it a travel log? What am I doing? And I actually had to look it up. Like, where are the Canary Islands again? It's actually Spain, but it's just off the coast of Africa, the west coast of Africa. So it was that far away and that exotic. And so the nice thing was that all the actors, whether they be from the UK or Ireland or Iceland, Germany, we all felt like we'd crash landed somewhere. And so the natural friendship that developed, I think it really lent itself to the feeling that we needed of being isolated, Now
this show is depicted around a plane crash. How many flights have you been on since shooting this show?
A lot. And yes, it always crosses your mind. Lately, of course, there's been way too many. And so it's every time there's turbulence, you go, oh, not this one. But yeah, it's one of those things that we just take for granted these days, isn't it? We all fly a lot.
Yeah, my son actually. This is not good for my nerves, Eric. My son just got his commercial pilot's license, so
really?
He flies around in those little 3-seater planes. I've been up with him. It's a little scary, but he enjoys it, and he wants to fly the big planes one day. So, but it's very scary these days.
Incredible that your son is holding the reins of the plane. That's a lot of trust going on there.
Yeah, and your dad, wasn't he a radio guy, or didn't he go to school for radio and television in Toronto? Was your dad ever on the radio?
It's one of the key stories of my life is that he went to the same school I went to. He went for the radio and television arts program in the 50s. I went for theater 30 years later, but I didn't know. He never told me. He was a financial analyst for Shell Oil and just somehow neglected, even when I got accepted to Ryerson, neglected to mention that his full intention was to be on the brand new media called television. And it's one of the great mysteries of my life. He never fully answered for me what changed his mind, besides just probably the practical side of being 1952 and not knowing if you were going to be William Shatner or not.
Your dad had to be pretty proud when you hosted SNL. I just saw that SNL celebrated that big 50-year anniversary. You hosted, and I remember the musical guests were Jay-Z and Beyonce that night. It was such a big night. What are your memories of SNL and hosting the show? And then what is your all-time favorite sketch on SNL of all time?
Oh, wow. Ooh, that's a tough one. My memory was that it was just, what you're being handed. You know how important the show is. People were always trying to dismiss it over 50 years, going, it's not what it used to be, and this cast isn't good. But we know that there's almost nothing like it as a touchstone in our culture the last 50 years. The week I showed up, my son was just 5 months old, and I just won the Emmy, and I was just very aware of having this opportunity. And I just remember there was a certain freedom. Getting out on that stage, I felt incredibly free. They'd written me a very funny opening song, and like a great sketch with Tina Fey. It was really fun. But I also remember that I spent the whole week going, I've heard of Beyonce. Who's Jay-Z? And when I finally asked the question, people looked at me like, are you insane? I was such a white sitcom guy. I hadn't really been paying attention to the big hits.
Obviously, you weren't big pimping and spending cheese, Eric. It sounds like.
I don't even get that reference. That's how sad that is.
Eric McCormack is our guest. He's got a new thriller on MGM Plus. It's called 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. I'd like to talk about your big show you did back in the late 90s and early 2000s. My father, a huge fan of this show, Will and Grace. Everybody loved this show. And your comedic timing in that show, I know you come from theater and you come from television, but people would think, I heard comedians compliment you on your comedic timing, almost as if you were a comedian on the show. Did you study comedy at all before playing the role of Will?
Interesting, though, because back then there was nowhere to go to sort of study comedy. You just had it in your bones from whatever your influences were. And for me, I mean, I can literally pinpoint them. First of all, they were Mel Blanc, the guy that did all of the voices on the Looney Tunes. I learned comedic timing from Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. And then my big show when I was about 9 was Get Smart. So everything I steal from Don Adams all the time. Then I discovered Woody Allen and George Carlin. And so I guess that was my comedic education. And watching MASH and All in the Family with my dad. By the time I got to theater school, I thought, I have to do Shakespeare, and that's what I wanted for several years. But when I actually left the Shakespeare company, I think it was 24 or 5, and the guy who was running it said, Eric, I have no more roles for you. I think it's time for you to move on. I said, yes, you're probably right. He says, have you ever thought about situation comedy on television? And he meant it kind of as an insult, but he was absolutely right. That's where I was sort of heading, and I didn't realize it.
I know Will and Grace are one of the last sitcoms that were, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the last to be filmed in front of a live studio audience. Why do you think sitcoms don't do this anymore?
Best explanation I've heard is that audiences became more sophisticated, and they when they saw 30 Rock or Sex and the City or Parks and Rec, that style, or The Office, that style kind of captured them, and I totally get that. But for a period of time there, the audience at home trusted the audience that was watching Friends in the studio, watching Will and Grace, watching Seinfeld. Even though I think they'd been told for years and years that it was all canned laughter, because that's what happened in the 60s, the Gilligan's Islands and all of it had fake laughs. But I would fight every week. That's why things like Cheers would always have, Cheers was filmed before a live studio audience. We wanted the audience to know that the laughs they're hearing are as genuine as theirs. And I think that made it more communal. I really miss it, because otherwise you're laughing alone in your bedroom, as opposed to feeling that you're with a bigger crowd.
Maybe it's that the writing is not quite as good, because boy, was the writing on Will and Grace so extraordinary, and so they didn't have to worry about getting the laughs. They knew they were going to get them. I know you and your good friend Sean Hayes have this podcast. I don't know that you've recorded an episode here too recently, but Just Jack and the Will podcast. You guys watched a bunch of old episodes. I thought it was great. I listened to some of that podcast, and I recommend people go check it out. It's called Just Jack and Will, the podcast. What stood out to you revisiting this show 20 years later?
I think it just, we didn't get to watch the whole thing. For me, what stuck out is just how there was a growth. The first season fit right into the sort of must-see TV, Friends, Seinfeld thing. But then we grew. I would say by season 2, we were very much our own ensemble. The four of us had a rhythm that was ours, and I think that's why it went on to become iconic, not because it was yet another sitcom, but because I think those four characters were very defined. Our chemistry was great, and it was so much fun to come out in front of a rabid studio audience who just couldn't wait to see us in the flesh, and then be those characters and even be more outrageous. We'd sometimes do things on purpose that you couldn't show on television just to get that audience roaring. And it's a very special combination of elements. It's hard. As Jim Burrows, our director, used to say, it's lightning in a bottle.
The audience will be on the edge of their seats when they watch MGM Plus on Sunday, March 2nd, and they see 9 bodies in a Mexican morgue that is starring our guest, Eric McCormack. Before we let you go, I would like to play a quick little game with you. Over the years, I know you work with some of the biggest names in entertainment with the big guest stars on Will and Grace. So I'm going to quickly, if you don't mind, name a guest star who came on Will and Grace. You quickly just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. So I'll start with Cher. That was Jack's ultimate idol. When I say Cher and her appearance on the show, what do you think of?
More beautiful without makeup than she was with all the makeup on.
Wow, and she still looks good. I think she's damn near 80 years old, and she's still a smoke show, that Cher.
Yep, she is.
How about Elton John? I know he was a surprise guest and like the head of the gay mafia. What a great episode with Sir Elton John.
Yeah.
What do you think of when I say Elton John?
Well, I say Elton John's married to my high school pal, David Furnish, so it was me that brought Elton to Will and Grace. I was the first. I sent them the first season on VHS tape. I sent the whole thing from the production office. They were the first people in the UK to see it, and Elton said, I'd love to come on that show.
How about the closeted detective who had a thing for you on the show, Michael Douglas, who, by the way, was at your Hollywood Walk of Fame presentation. So you got to love Michael Douglas, correct?
Michael Douglas. My mother loved Michael Douglas on the streets of San Francisco, and what comes to mind is just I was so happy to have him there all week, but I wanted to make him laugh. And on the shoot night in front of the audience, there's a line I was supposed to have about how, Will says I always had a thing for cops, but I changed the line to, I used to masturbate watching the streets of San Francisco. And he didn't crack. He didn't crack. The audience was going crazy. He didn't crack. And then just as the laughter died down, he said, "You liked Carl Malden that much, did you?" And that's
classic. And
that's
then
my Michael number.
Finally, how about Doogie Howser when he came on? The great Neil Patrick Harris played the leader of the gay conversion group. How about that for irony? What a great episode.
Yeah, exactly. Great episode. He's so crazy, multi-talented. And I think that was sort of the beginning of the Neil Patrick Harris renaissance. I'm not even sure. I think he was just about to start How I Met Your Mother at that time. So it really was kind of like, oh my God, you're the guy from Doogie Howser. And then suddenly he was Neil Patrick Harris everywhere. And he's amazing.
Is it true? I heard you got a call back for the role of Ross on Friends. Is that true?
That is true. That is true. That year, anyone my age who was doing pilot season that year, remember, like Noah Wiley, we were all aware that there was Friends and there was ER. These were going to be the shows. If you were out there auditioning, you wanted to get one of them in '94. And I got this call back, and this was going to be it. And then, of course, they didn't. And 4 years later, I'm playing Will, and Jim Burrows, who directed both shows. I said, Jimmy, I don't know if you know this, I came pretty close in the role of Ross. And he said, oh, honey, they wrote the part for Schwimmer. You were wasting your time.
Did you ever drop that Schneider stash from when you were doing the show on Broadway, The Cottage? Do you still have that stash?
You know what? So I've had two versions of that in the last few years. One was a great big, thick Burton Cummings kind of mustache that I grew for a Canadian comedy, and but that I drew that nice little one for. I loved it so much, and yet people react so bad. Every man out on the street, I'm looking at my hotel room. Everyone's got a beard. Every guy's got a beard, but you see a guy with just a very intentional mustache. And it just gives everybody the creeps. It's weird. They better be a fireman if they have it.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for your time. Eric McCormack, we'll be watching you on MGM Plus, the thriller, 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be watching the show. See you on TV.
Thanks, man. Great time.